Today I'm going to be working in my chronological study of the end times, looking at the table of contents. We've handled rapture, and it corresponds really well with chapter 4. Then we handled several items that I believe need to be in place before tribulation starts. The League of 10 Nations, the rise of Babylon, Gog and Magog war, the one world religion. Now, whether they happen before rapture or after rapture, I don't know, but they have to be in place before tribulation starts. Then we talked about the title deed to earth. That is, that Jesus accepts the title deed from God, and he's the one that's going to open the seals, which is pretty much next. We also talked about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and that they've come before. I've included that in my video about the first seal. Now, the first seal is the Antichrist, and we have several descriptions of him so that we can identify him when he comes. Now there's a couple things that happen before the second seal, and one is the peace treaty. So we might do both of these. We'll see. Peace treaty and the Jerusalem. We'll see how big they are. Anyway, so that's where we are. A peace treaty is signed, probably due to the devastation of the Gog-Magog war brought to her enemies, as well as the rise of the Antichrist. Israel is now in a perfect position to have a peace treaty signed with her enemies and have it appear that it would actually work. So again, this is going to be the start of the peace treaty. So that's the start of the tribulation. Okay, all these things have kind of occurred before the start of tribulation. Peace treaty with Israel, Daniel 9:27a. Then he, the Antichrist, shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to the sacrifice and offering. A lot of people have gotten confused and upset with this 1 week, middle of week. But really, if you go to the original words, it's a group of 7. Okay. And so it could be a week, but it is more likely years. So many for 7 years. In the middle of the 7 years, which is 3.5 years, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And we know 3.5 years in is mid-trib, which a lot of things change at mid-trib. What is the word used here to indicate a treaty? A covenant. How long is that treaty? 1 week or 7 years. In the book of Daniel, this time amount actually means 7 years instead of 7 days. The scripture is full is shown in the appendix. Well, you can read it. It's Daniel 9. How do we know this treaty has to do with the Jews? Because sacrifice and offering. There's no other, although the Jews aren't sacrificing and offering now in our lifetime, they will once they start the temple again. They'll have sacrifice and offering like they did in the Old Testament. And so we know that it will stop the sacrifice and offering. So we know that that is Israel. If a week means 7 years, then what would be the middle of the week equal in years? 3.5 years. Okay, so why do we call this covenant a peace treaty? The definition of the word covenant is an agreement. So there is an agreement between Israel and others. Now we know that there can be a trade agreement treaties, non-aggression treaties, and peace treaties. This covenant cannot just be a trade treaty, as Israel will be able to build her temple, and she will not be able to spend her resources on the project if she had to defend herself from attack. Therefore, this treaty has to be a non-aggression or peace treaty. Who is the peace treaty with other than Israel? There's no way to know for sure, but a peace treaty does indicate this is made with her enemies. One strong possibility is with the Muslims, as the Dome of the Rock is on the Temple Mount, which is where the Jerusalem temple needs to be built. And we know the temple is to be built as it exists by the middle of tribulation. Note, it's possible that the walls of the Dome of the Rock have fallen at this point, and see under Gog and Magog war. Why is there a peace treaty made at this time? There has been a peace treaty with Israel and her enemies several times in history, So why is this one special? First of all, the Antichrist will be there. But second, it allows Israel to rebuild the temple. Thirdly, this peace that Antichrist will broker will make Israel believe that this Antichrist is their long-awaited Messiah. Jesus talks about this in Matthew. I have come in my Father's name. Well, it's actually in John, huh? Come in my Father's name and you do not receive me. If another comes in his name, him you will receive. This peace treaty is also important in prophecy because it starts the 7 years of tribulation. Why is this peace treaty important? Starts the 7-year tribulation. It establishes peace, supposedly, between Israel and its neighbors, and the temple could be built at this time. Who will this peace treaty be with? All the enemies of Israel. Some of them have been devastated by the Gog and Magog war, which is the reason why I think it's after rapture, Gog and Magog war. So now, and just as I thought, we were going to go into the Jerusalem temple being rebuilt. Finally, the Jews will be able to do what they've wanted to do since the last temple was destroyed in 70 AD, rebuild their temple on the Temple Mount. Up to this point, they have not been able to fully exercise their religious beliefs without the ability for sacrifice and offerings and all the rituals set up in the book of Leviticus. So again, on our timeline, raptures happen. The various items that need to be taken care of before tribulation have happened, including the Antichrist arriving. And then there's been many things that have happened in heaven. So now the start of tribulation was the peace treaty. And the first thing that happens after the start of tribulation is the Jewish temple is being rebuilt. So let's look at the scriptures about that. The Jewish temple is rebuilt. Here, there is no one scripture that talks of the temple being built during this tribulation, just those that talk of it already being built. So we have to extrapolate. All of these scriptures are discussed in more detail in other parts of this book. Main scripture, Revelation 11, 1 through 2a. Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it's been given to the Gentiles. Related scriptures, Daniel 9:27a. Then he, the Antichrist, shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. 2 Thessalonians 2, 3b and 4. The son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And Matthew 24:15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. So all those indicate that the temple is already built, and we have to have some way of having the temple built. So I'm putting the peace treaty on there. In the middle of the week, the Antichrist shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. Where would the son of perdition, the Antichrist, sit as God in the temple of God? Where will the abomination of desolation be located at? The holy place. What was John to measure? He is to measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. In his measuring, what is John to leave out? The court, which is outside the temple, and don't measure it. Why was he to leave this part out? Because it's given to the Gentiles. Can the temple really be built in such a short time? Remember, in my other videos, I've talked that I believe that there's a little span of time between rapture and the start of tribulation. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is chaos going back into organization is going to take time. Two, the Gog and Magog wars, if it happens in right after rapture, the stuff would fall on the land, and Israel, it says in the scriptures that Israel will burn it for 7 years. They'll be exiting Jerusalem in 3.5 years into the tribulation. So that at least gives 3.5 years of between tribulation and rapture. Then here, 3.5 years or 3 to 5 years gives time for the temple to be rebuilt. One argument against the temple being built within the 3.5 years is shown in the Bible. When Jesus told his enemies that if the temple was destroyed, he could raise it in 3 days, they responded with how long it took for the temple to be built at that time. John 2:19-20. Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it up." Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" However, many improvements have occurred in construction methods. Ray Gano, an end times scholar, writes, "A meeting was held in November 1990 with religious leaders, political leaders, scientists, and archaeologists in Israel to discuss the building time of the temple. This was needed in order to work out details for the Oslo III Treaty talks that would be held in 1996. These are the negotiations which will deal with directly with what will be done with Jerusalem. The time determined to rebuild the temple was 1 to 2 years. This does not include all the ornamental work that would be needed. This is just get the temple up. An altar will be raised somewhere west of the temple construction site to start daily sacrifices. Once the priests resumed daily sacrifices, the construction of the temple itself would begin. Also, if you want to read further about this subject, look up the present organization called the Temple Institute. They're preparing all they can for the rebuilding of temples so that utensils, clothing, priesthood, and all the items needed for the temple when it's built is already being worked on now. What does it mean that the court of the Gentiles? Revelation 11 helps us to understand how the temple will be built if the Dome of the Rock is still there. Pastor Chuck Smith explains, north of the Dome of the Rock, Mosaic Mosque, is a large flat area, perhaps as much as 10 acres, in which they could easily rebuild their temple and never disturb the holy Muslim site. I'm certain that this will be the suggestion. In John's vision of the new temple, Revelation chapter 11, where John is ordered to measure it, the Lord said, "Don't measure the outer court. It's been given to the pagans." In Ezekiel, when he sees the temple, he says, "And there was a wall 500 meters to separate the holy place from the profane." So I do believe that a wall will be put up along the north porticos of the Dome of the Rock Mosque, and the Jews will be allowed to rebuild the temple and will begin their sacrifices again. Do you think it possible that the temple can be rebuilt in less than 3.5 years? Why or why not? I think the structure can be rebuilt. And the fact that if they're preparing as much as they can, so that when the structure is rebuilt, all the other stuff is already done. So that it is possible since they're doing all this prep work, I think. Why do you think John is not to measure the court of the Gentiles? I don't know. It is possible that that's where the Dome of the Rock sits, but I think that would be awfully close, I think. Anyway, not really sure on that. Anyway, so that concludes our talk on both the peace treaty and the New Jerusalem temple. And so I hope that helps you. I hope you're willing to continue our series. I believe we've got the second seal opening in the next video. Thank you. Bye now.